When people think of lost media, we often imagine the search ending and the topic being found for all to see. But more times than not, lost media often stays the way it is for one reason or another, ranging from legal issues, AIDS, or destruction of copies. This is the lost media that may remain lost forever. If you have been around the lost media community for the past 4 years, you've probably heard about Slamfest 99. Slamfest, also known as Smash Bros. Live, was a live event held in the MCM Grand Theme Park to promote the release of the first Smash game in 1999. It featured 4 costume Smash characters from the iconic ad, duking it out within a ring for a 17-minute long fight. This event was also streamed through Real Player at the time for anyone who wasn't in the area. But as time went on, Slamfest, along with its original broadcast, was left in obscurity for decades until being mentioned by GameXplain host Andre. This brought it back into the limelight, with users like L Supersonic Q and members from the Lost Media Discord server getting into the topic for the next few years. And while pictures have been found for Slamfest, ranging from books to old websites to even the PR firm of this event, any leads that could lead to the full release of Slamfest have led in dead ends, ranging from contacting file databases that might have the files, looking at magazines, and of course, contacting people who dealt with promotional or journalism relating to the event. And even the journalists who did respond often mentioned how Nintendo had to get their own promotional tapes from them, which puts even more doubts for Nintendo having a copy themselves. And companies like Golan and former employees of On Demand have responded similarly in the regards to the unlikelihood of Slamfest existing in one of their company archives. As of right now, Slamfest 99 is still an ongoing search with an active community, but the chances of a file being found are still uncertain. With Spider-Man being one of Marvel's most beloved characters, it would only make sense that fan projects would be made as a result. The good and the bad. This brings us to not only one of the first attempts of a Spider-Man fan film, but one of the earliest examples of a comic adaptation into a feature-length film. Spider-Man vs. Kraven the Hunter. This movie was first envisioned by director Bruce Cardozo, who already had a background in making well-received amateur films of the superhero variety like Voodoo Kid and a bunch of others that still remain lost. His goal of making a comic-accurate superhero film of Spider-Man was the one he pitched to his film class when entering New York University in 1972. And despite his film class viewing the idea as ludicrous, the go-ahead from his professor, along with the unofficial blessing from Stan Lee, would lead to the movie starting production as an adaptation of the 15th issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. The movie's plot would have been pretty accurate to the comics, with Spider-Man beating up a gang of thugs, with one of them getting away, which happens to be the Chameleon, who would call his half-brother, Kraven the Hunter, to take down Spider-Man, with him being intrigued over the possibility of capturing Spidey as a part of his collection. Aside from its accuracy, the movie would have also included some new details, like Gwen Stacy being a part of the film, and the inclusion of tigers during the climax between Spidey and Kraven. For the cast, Spider-Man would have been played by Zoe Ellison, Richard Eberhardt was doing the acting within the costume of Spider-Man, and Andrew Pastoro was J. Jonah Jameson. There were even rumors that stated that the characters would have a prominent New York accent for further accuracy. After the film's completion, there were initial plans for the movie to see a commercial release from Marvel, but was rejected due to the company not wanting to give the rights to Spider-Man, along with the other legal agreements they had from other companies. This at first angered Cardozo due to the hard work he put into the film, but he would later be persuaded into showing the film through screenings in conventions and film fests starting in 1975. But even with these screenings, the movie would still be held tight by its curators, with Cardozo even rejecting people from obtaining copies aside from his close friends and family until his passing in 2015. Whereabouts regarding the film's status would remain unknown until 2024, where Cardozo's longtime friend, Bill Baldwin, confirmed that the movie was kept in a safe place following a burglary in 2010 for the film, and that he would later entrust it to his family in 2013, giving a small glimmer of hope that the movie may get released someday. One of the most searched topics in lost media and the general internet community is that of lost game builds for many released and unreleased titles. And a game that fills both of those boxes is that of Mother 3: Fall of the Pig King, or more commonly known as Earthbound 64. Initial plans for Mother 3 were envisioned after the release of Mother 2 in 1994 as a title for the Super Nintendo, with Toei even wanting the game to stay 2D even with the upcoming release of the N64. But pushback eventually led to Mother 3 shifting its focus into a 3D game as a launch title for Nintendo's add-on, the 64DD. This would be an issue as most of the developers didn't have experience with 3D titles until development started with Mother 3. But even with these issues, Mother 3 still moved on with development, making constant appearances in Japanese and Western magazines, along with it appearing in Space World with demos, previews, and the now iconic trailer in 1999. While initial and earlier versions of Mother 3 from 1997 presented a more colorful, cartoony, and lighthearted version of the game that was more comparable to previous entries, later builds presented a more realistic and serious atmosphere that was a clear tonal shift, with even Toei himself stating how the game would have betrayed the player in its 12 chapters. The most notable differences from this version and the Game Boy Advance version would consist of different character designs, unused enemies like this two-headed Kraken, and a much bigger focus on Flint as the main character, with him even having PSI in comparison to the final version of the game. And that is only scratching the surface of the changes, but we would be here all day if that was the case. But with all of this stuff coming in place, it would only be a matter of time before major roadblocks would be hit. And with the 64DD's failure, it resulted in many games having to move back into the base 64, which heavily affected games like Mother 3 that were so dependent on the add-on, further pushing back Mother 3 until its cancellation in 2000 through Toei's blog, until resurfacing as the Game Boy Advance title we know of today. Interviews about Earthbound 64 said the game was around 60% complete from Miyamoto's statements, which could have been even higher when considering his perfectionism. But we may never know on how complete this version of Mother 3 was until a game build leaks online, which considering Nintendo's protectiveness seems unlikely. Plastic Beats was the third studio album released by the virtual band Gorillaz in 2010, and while the album today is seen as one of Gorillaz' finest works for its futuristic feel, stacked features, and themes of environmentalism, it was also remembered for its quantity of lost content, ranging from scrapped songs, lost games, and unfinished music videos due to the initial flop of the album in comparison to the two previous releases. But the holy grail of lost Plastic Beats content was simply called the Plastic Beats rap game, and was released in 2010 along with the huge overhaul to the Gorillaz website for the album's release. The game was a point-and-click adventure game where you could explore the beats in its entirety and be given minigame missions from Murdoch. While previous Gorilla websites gave you the ability to explore Kong HQ, this was on a different level in terms of depth, despite being unfinished during its development. But it was this same complexity that would be the reason why this game is still lost. As to prevent Plastic Beats music from being ripped from the website, the game was hosted on an external server with code that was purposely complicated to prevent any EMI music from getting stolen. This would be a problem in 2016 when the Gorillaz website would rebrand upon the announcement of Humans, resulting in the shutdown of the Plastic Beats rap game. And while assets have been preserved from the game via the Wayback Machine, the game itself has still remained as a cold case aside from a slight mention of the game possibly being re-released by its original developers. The only clear look of the Plastic Beats rap game comes from walkthroughs on YouTube. One of the worst ways for anything to become lost forever is through destruction, no matter if it's intentional or not. And in this segment, this falls under the latter. Madlib is an accomplished hip-hop producer responsible for making many beats for many rappers ranging from MF Doom and Zay Dilla in the 2000s to the likes of Kanye and Freddie Gibbs in the 2010s. His long history has resulted in troves of content being made that hasn't been released, like Mad Villainy 2, collab albums of Mac Miller and Mos Def, and probably a bunch of other beats that were on hold. Following the 2025 fires in LA, Madlib and his family would lose their house in it. And while they were able to gain immense funding from their close friends and loyal fans alike, the same cannot be said for his catalog, as all of it was destroyed in the fires. And with Madlib being an old school producer, it meant that a lot of his content was unreleased and was never backed up through any service. This means that entire catalogs of instrumentals, songs, and collabs may be lost forever. But as of right now, we still don't know the full extent of what albums may have been saved via any external source. But considering that a lot of these albums were collabs, maybe a couple have been saved as files via other rappers' catalogs. But that's just speculation at this point. The silent film era is often considered to be one of the worst times for media preservation, with thousands of films still being lost due to the sheer carelessness that came with nitrogen films at the time. And on that list of films stands one that is not only a holy grail for lost media, but media preservation as a whole: London After Midnight. London After Midnight is a silent horror film released on December 11, 1927 by MGM and directed by Todd Browning based on the book The Hypnotist. The movie also starred Lawrence Chaney in his final major role as the man in the beaver's hat and Burke before his passing. The basic and somewhat spoiler-free premise of this hour-long film would have been about Roger, the owner of a mansion, being found dead with a note claiming he did it himself, which officials believe despite his close ones saying otherwise. 5 years later, and Professor Burke is now back on the case again after the suspicious behavior of the Manson's new residents, who happen to be vampires who take anyone in who questions them. The movie was initially met with mixed reception upon its release. Many praised the dual performance given by Lon Chaney along with the makeup given to him, while others criticized the inconsistent and confusing tone that the film was going for. Despite these critics, the film was a commercial success, resulting in a remake being made in 1935 by Browning called The Mark of the Vampire, while also serving as inspiration for many horror films to follow. But while this movie is important to film history, the only copy that was available was kept within Vault 7 of MGM's Lot 1, and on August 11, 1965, a fire would break out in that lot, resulting in the destruction of the only known copy. Today, the movie's availability only exists in rumors of a copy floating around in foreign markets or in the hands of a private collector. The closest we have gotten to the film was a reconstruction made in 2002 by Rick Skamildlin that used stills and the original soundtrack to recreate what the film could have been. One type of lost media that somewhat falls into the category of lost forever is that of unconfirmed lost media. Lost media that may be real, but if it is, will probably remain lost in history. This brings us to the Japanese website known as Tusan, when in 2004, on a board about creepy ads, a user would mention the first ever sighting of Hitogata. There was this terribly scary commercial, and I still have it constantly left in my memory. There were two white human figures depicted against a black backdrop, and this noise going can kept ringing. What's sore is the part that went, every 2 seconds a man dies on Earth, and when the noise is repeated again, the other figure disappears. In the next instant, the human figure returns back to its original place, and now the other one disappears. It was a commercial with only that repeating over and over. Following this sighting, other conflicting memories of the ad would pop up. Some said there was a railroad sign present, while others thought the background was pure black. A general consensus of what this ad was by the lost media community was that of a PSA ad about railroad safety sometime around the late 90s or the early 2000s. But most of the search efforts have been that of speculation, aside from some attempts to catalog the ad's sightings. It doesn't help that a lot of the search results for Hitogata are that of markups and fake ads claiming to be the real one, which makes finding the original even harder. And while it's possible for Hitogata to just be another hoax in the same vein as others, there's still a chance for it to be real, even if it's out of our reach, which is something you could probably say for all the other topics in this video. And hopefully some of these topics, despite the odds being against them, can be found and finally make this video just a smidge more outdated.